Hello and welcome to Remasterpiece Reviews, where we review a remake or remaster on two merits: how well it captures the essence of the original, and how well it stands on its own. I'm Chris and I'll be spoiling both of these games extensively, which means this right here,
this is the point of no return
when it comes to spoilers for both Final Fantasy VII and Final Fantasy VII Remake. Though, before we enter spoiler land, if you are curious if you could play Remake without playing the original first, let me just say, you are way better off playing the original game beforehand. The whole thing, not just the Midgar segment. Alright, spoiler time, let's go. Here we are, the first Remasterpiece review, and I find myself staring down the barrel of what is easily going to be the hardest one of these I ever do. Generally speaking, a remake goes in one of two directions. Direction the first: you don't change anything besides improving the graphics and adding modern quality of life features. Basically a glorified remaster. Direction the second: you keep the spirit of the property alive, but everything else is open season for changes and improvements. Borderline new property territory. So imagine my surprise when this game waltzes in and chooses Direction 3, and the truly wild part is that most people won't realize that it did this until hour 30 or so. As you play the game, you'll experience major moments of the original game. In some of them, they play out like you remember. In others, things may deviate a little bit. And it's in those moments that you get your first hints at this game's major twist. Whenever deviations are threatening to occur, phantasmal forces appear to intercede, showing up seemingly to course correct the remake. During my initial playthrough, myself and chat slowly started joking that these were continuity ghosts. This joke would slowly become more earnest until eventually it wasn't a joke at all. It was actually true. The great deception at play here is that the game titled Final Fantasy VII Remake isn't a remake at all, because this game is aware of the original game and it recognizes it as a continuity that exists. The original game was a tale of folks struggling against larger-than-life foes. Shinra, a monolithic company destroying the planet. Sephiroth, an impossibly powerful being trying to, well, also destroy the planet. More than that, though, Cloud was fighting against himself, struggling to find his own sense of self amongst these larger-than-life threats, with each character recruit going through their own related struggles. The new game builds on all these things with the addition of also fighting against destiny itself. Hell, let's not even call it destiny. You are fighting against the very notion of expectations here. The expectations of the fans for what this game should be. The very real force of nostalgia and tangled emotions in this, the real world, made manifest as whispers in the game. This kind of meta-commentary on the nature of creation, creator, and consumer is what I live for, and it's such a rarity! What starts as a very literal remake with the first chapter, which was of course released as a free demo to truly bury the lead, ends with an over-the-top battle against the very expectations the developers themselves established. Cloud and team literally defeat the will of fate and fandom, and open up the future entries to, as the game puts it, terrifying freedom. Anything can happen going forward. So how well does this capture the essence of the original? Lots of folks will argue it fails because it's not a remake in the first place. I say it succeeds because of that. The themes are all there, and, if anything, are enhanced by the struggle against fate. Though, before we go too far down that rabbit hole, let's break a few things down first. The combat in the original game was heralded as a breakthrough for the genre thanks to the active time battle system. Players were still in a turn-based RPG, but real time determined the turns. Being too slow could spell doom. It put a sense of pressure on the player to think fast and reactively. That being said, besides the occasional limit break, the party composition was utterly pointless. Anyone could play any role thanks to just slotting materia into each character as you saw fit. You got items that could change their internal stats, which never really were all that apparent for how effective they were to begin with. So who you played with didn't matter much at all. Honestly, it was personal preference. It was whoever you wanted in your party was in your party. Remake makes everyone feel truly distinct in combat, fitting together like perfect little puzzle pieces. Tifa swoops in to rapidly build a stagger and then ramp that bonus damage up. Cloud is utterly pummeling with heavy hits. Aerith is creating zones in the actual battling world / field you're fighting in that buff your characters. Barret is soaking up damage while keeping a stream of bullets flowing. Each enemy demands a slightly different strategy, and moving these characters into position to exploit those weaknesses and build combos off one another is buttery smooth and incredibly satisfying. The spirit of the ATB system is here, but it's a beautiful new animal. Not only are the characters more distinct in combat, their characterization and dialogue is cranked up to 11. By taking the first 5 hours of the original game and creating a 40-hour video game out of that, the writers have a lot more room to play with the expanded cast. Characters I was pretty lukewarm on in the original game are now some of my favorites. Everyone in the main cast has major and impactful moments, ranging from legitimately laugh-out-loud funny writing that I was cracking up to very somber and truly moving moments that, I'm not gonna lie, almost made me cry. I was tearing up a few times. Even better, characters that were barely in the original game have so much more purpose now. For instance, in the original game, Mayor Domino helps the players on a whim. Literally, you walk into his office, and he's just like, I don't give a shit about this place. If you answer my question right, I will give you a key card for the next floor. And it doesn't matter if you answer it wrong, he still gives it to you anyway. It's just really whether or not you get a better bonus item. In the remake, the man is actively working with Avalanche as an inside agent. He's our man on the inside. They hint at him throughout the game, you slowly get an idea of who it might be, and then it's revealed Mayor Domino is a mole working for Avalanche. He goes from being a grumpy old man to an agent provocateur. Don't even get me started on the music. When 11-year-old Chris played Final Fantasy VII for the first time, he ended up listening to the same songs on that soundtrack non-stop for years. Somewhere in the forgotten halls of the internet's memory are several GeoCities and Angelfire websites I made that played One Wing Angel or the Turks theme on an endless loop, and people visiting my terrible websites had no way to stop that music from playing. That soundtrack was iconic for damn good reasons. Remake brings everything to the table here. You get faithful high-def versions of those classics you like, but you also get banging remixes that I'm listening to right now as I type this up. And the brand new tracks are overflowing with personality. Sure, some of the more incidental music's forgettable, and I'm not a huge fan of one or two of the newer tracks, but for the most part, there's a lot of real winners on here. It's a great soundtrack, one that I'm going to own. Which brings us to that rabbit hole I mentioned before, the story. So for the most part, this game faithfully retells the events from the initial bombing of the Mako reactor right up to the end of the highway motorcycle escape sequence when you leave Midgar for the very first time, but with lots of new side quests and character moments interjected between those major beats. So you escape that first bombing like you remember, but now you have to navigate the city streets and experience the actual chaos and sorrow and human suffering that your actions had on the general population. The slums of Sector 7 are no longer just a couple of shops and a tutorial building. This is where people live, and you get to experience what life is like by taking on odd jobs around the area. You want to spend more time with Avalanche? You will. You want to see Jessie's family home and learn about her life and her upbringing? It's happening. You want to see all Wedge's cats? Here they are! Most importantly, this allows Shinra to be the villainous focus for 40 hours, and you will grow to hate them more than you ever have. They get much more focused and clear motivations this time around, fermenting a pro-war fervor in the population by tying Avalanche to Wutai, all while secretly trying to figure out how to reach the Promised Land. No longer do they drop a plate just to crush the homes of 6 terrorists, which, even as a child, was cartoonishly evil. Like, the infrastructural damage alone isn't worth it. However, using a massive false flag terrorist event to justify a war, still absurd, but much more believable. I mean, we kind of already have this problem in the real world, so if it's a conspiracy theory for us, it's good enough for a video game plotline. Now, these are all pretty specific things, though, and for me, it's themes that matter more than specific story beats in these kind of things. Struggling against impossible odds, trying to save the planet from a greedy corporation, finding personal agency within yourself, overcoming trauma and grief, the drive to protect the ones you love, carrying the memories and spirit of those lost, going forward. This game feels like Final Fantasy VII, even when you're literally battling the specter of that game's impossibly large legacy. What is more Final Fantasy than fighting a massive conglomeration of the first game's cultural fucking footstep? It's incredible. So yes, I think Remake holds true to the spirit of the original game, even while you battle against that very thing in the final act. Of course, while I may love this aspect of the game, it does pose quite a significant problem here. See, if I want to experience Resident Evil 2, I could play the 2019 remake of it and have an experience that is, personally speaking, better in every way compared to the original game. I don't need to play the original game to understand everything about the remake. Even the Resident Evil 3 remake, which changes a fundamental aspect of the original by removing the branching paths, serves as a fine Resident Evil 3 experience. These remakes stand alone as games that can be played with no prior knowledge of the originals. They're self-contained. If someone without any personal connection to the original game were to play Final Fantasy Remake, they would be fine at first. Like I said, those themes are all present, and the game has the soul of the original on proud display. It's telling a coherent story for the most part. However, eventually they will get to those moments where the Whispers are trying to course correct the narrative to where it was in the original game, and they won't get that. Several times, flashbacks to Cloud's past happen, but also flash forwards to iconic events from later in the game. These would be indistinguishable for these players. Sephiroth's cryptic lines eventually click when you realize what's happening, but for these hypothetical players, the man will just be needlessly cryptic throughout the entire game. Of course, that final battle against Fate would just be gibberish that came out of nowhere, and honestly would probably ruin the game for this hypothetical person. Seriously, think about it. You play a game about a shady but massive power company destroying the planet, and you learn about their unethical human experiments. Sephiroth is a mysterious force tied to the company's unethical experiments, and he haunts you both as a ghost from your past and as a menacing force in the present. You finally get to the top of that massive Shinra building, you save your friend, you escape, and then you fight a massive ghost monster while Sephiroth and Aerith talk about fate and freedom, and that ghost is tied to a future alternate timeline, and why? Why is any of this happening? Without the old game in that brain of yours, this is pure, unconnected lunacy. Then, just to kick you in the balls one last time, we find out that our actions somehow allow a man named Zack to survive a hit squad, which in the original game he did not survive, he was gunned down. And just to really wrap this up at a confusing bow, the scene in the original game where we see Zack die is a hidden optional cutscene that most people never saw. You have to go back to a location you have no reason to go back to, and you have to touch a tank that you have no reason to touch. Anyway, they won't know who the hell Zack is. Hell, I don't even know if that means Zack is alive in the same timeline as the remake I just played, or something else entirely. It's confusing for me, and I have extensive knowledge of the original, and I just finished playing the remake. Folks who want to experience Final Fantasy VII for the first time will grab this game and have no fucking idea what is going on at the end of the game. Which, kinda sucks for them, but that lie, that this is a faithful remake, is what made the experience so incredible for me. Reliving the memories, experiencing the expanded content, seeing the changes, and slowly piecing together the role the Whispers are playing and everything, and finally, putting the puzzle together and getting it before having that narrative thread explode in that climax, leaving future entries open to be, again, as the game puts it, terrifyingly free to be whatever the creators want them to be. As a fan of the original game, this is better than a remake, and much more personal than a reboot. This is the soul of the old game in a glorious new body, with the freedom and will to do new things. I'm more excited for the next game than I ever was for this one, and let me tell you, I was really excited for this one. Final Fantasy VII Remake is both an excellent retelling of the Midgar section of the original game, and a meta-narrative on fan expectations versus the creative drive of the designers. Famously, the original was made while Hironobu Sakaguchi was dealing with the loss of his mother. Now we're playing a game that says, hey, we made that game you love over 23 years ago. We've grown as storytellers, we're in different places in our lives, and we want to have the freedom to fix mistakes we made and to tell this story in a different way. And then, it has the sheer moxie, the chutzpah, to make you, the player, complicit in that by having you defeat fate, destiny, fan expectations, whatever you want to call it. It makes you do the final deed, clearing the designers to do what they want going forward. It's brilliant. I can't get over how much I love what they did here. The original game went down in history as the game that brought the JRPG to popularity on a global scale, and is one of the most beloved video game stories ever told. This remake should go down in history for having the guts to take such a bold creative risk, the temerity to be so very strange and meta, and to tell the story the way they want to tell it now, rather than the same way they did back in 1997. Well, I hope you enjoyed my thoughts on Final Fantasy VII Remake. If you want to go on an even deeper dive, check out our Remasterpiece Theater episode on a very related topic, Parasite Eve. For instance, did you know that Final Fantasy VII was originally going to take place in New York City? It's true! We talk about that and much more in that video. Anyway, like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and smash that bell.